Tom, great to have you on the show again. Welcome back.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. It's my pleasure to be here. We had a real good time last time we talked about a year ago, and I'm looking forward to today.
Yes. And congratulations on the Kickstarter campaign. You met your goal. You exceeded your goal, like you were just saying. And so that's a big plus.
It is really a big plus. You know, Kickstarter has a rule that says that if you don't make your goal, all the money goes back. You don't keep any of it. So you either make your goal or better, or you walk away with nothing.
Yeah.
So when you have that kind of arrangement, you always make your goal as low as you can possibly get it and still get something useful done with the money.
Yes.
You have to get enough to actually do something, but you don't want to price it too high, or you might get nothing if you don't make it. So we had a $150,000 goal. It probably will take about twice that much to really do all the things we'd like to do, and maybe even more than that. Who knows? I'm just guessing at what things will cost anyway. You know, it's kind of hard to cost things like lab space and expertise, talent. Just depends on where you find it and what else they're doing, and what they charge. The equipment is also hard to price because we don't know exactly what equipment to get. You know, I'm not an experimental physicist. Well, I was when I was in graduate school some 40 years ago, but I have no idea what equipment costs and whatever. And we need to find somebody that's smart about that so that we don't have this long learning curve. Yeah. It'd take us months just to figure out how to operate this stuff, where somebody could walk in and already knows that. It would be helpful. So we've got a lot of work to do now. Yes, it's quite an adventure. You know, I put out these physics experiments that would help demonstrate that our reality is indeed a virtual reality. The idea being that the results of the experiments wouldn't be able to be explained any other way. You know, just virtual reality is the only way that they would work. So I put those out in 2016 in a conference I did in Los Angeles. And so that's been about 2 years ago, not quite. That was October 2016. And we've been looking for ways to actually get them done ever since. And for all year and a half, we've been struggling with how are we going to get that done? We went to a couple of universities, and if you walk into a university with no money, you're not exactly, in a position to really ask any favors.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. I mean, everybody's busy. They're working on their own grant money. They're not interested in putting all that aside and working for you for free. So it's like, come back when you can pay your way. So that's when we decided to do Kickstart.
Are these predominantly going to be done at universities?
I don't know. I suspect so. We haven't yet figured that out. First, we have to find the talent, and they will probably have a lot to say with where it's done. If the talent is in a university, which it probably will be, they may want to do it there in their own labs. That's very convenient for them to be done in the labs where they work every day, rather than a lab, on the other side of the United States or something. Is a little problematic for them. Right. So it depends on who we find and what facilities they have access to. And that sort of thing is exactly where it'll be done, but probably done in a university and probably managed by a couple of physicists from that university. So that will be the, kind of the way it'll go. And I'm expecting 6 months or so before we actually can get started with that, because there's a lot of things to figure out and negotiate in the meantime. But it's going to be a lot of fun. Sometimes people ask me, well, what if what if they don't work out the way you think? Well, that's a possibility, right? Yeah. If I knew for sure exactly what the answers were, we wouldn't have to do experiments. The experiments are to turn theory into fact, and you don't know how they'll come out. But to me, it almost doesn't matter in the sense that I will learn something. That's the point of doing the experiment, from my viewpoint. It's learning something. This area of applying virtual reality theory to quantum mechanics is brand new. I mean, it's just mine. I don't know that anybody else thinks this way, and it's never been done before. So there are no experiments out there that have been done to try to reinterpret or re-understand, I guess might say, quantum mechanics from a virtual reality viewpoint. Well, I've done that, and I've come up with some things that sort of conflict with the way science thinks about it, the way physics thinks about the quantum mechanics. So I'd like to put it to the test by taking it, to an experiment. It's a little hard to do, though. The whole idea is a bit audacious because we are trying to do a physical experiment that shows us something that's non-physical. The virtual reality, the consciousness system behind it, all of that is, it's kind of outside of our
Right.
grasp. The server isn't here. The server can't be in the same virtual reality that it creates.
Yes.
It has to be in a reality outside of that virtual reality that it creates. So we're to point a finger at something that's non-physical, and that's just a little hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not going to be proof. Proof, Dean Radin is fond of saying, proof is for whiskey. Proof is also for mathematicians and logisticians, but not really for scientists anymore. We talk about evidence. So we gave up proof in physics after Newton. As you recall, Newton had a lot of laws. This is the law, this is the way it is. And of course, they all turned out not to be right. They all turned out to be approximations.
Yeah.
And within a certain area, they work just fine, but they're not really fundamental at all.
Mm-hmm.
So we realized that calling things laws and proofs is a little arrogant, thinking that you know everything, and never in the next 100,000 years will be any facts that will ever conflict with that or say that it's any different. That's unlikely. And thousands of years from now, science will be a different thing altogether.
So would you say, Tom, that it's sort of one question that came up? I remember when I was chatting with Donna on that FaceTime, and I sort of tried to write it down and try to make it a little specific. But I'm gonna give you a question just from a different angle, because I know you've gotten a lot of questions about the experiments and that sort of thing. But here's one from let's call it a mystical angle. So this experiment has been around for the better part of a century, I guess 90 years or so, some form of a double slit experiment. And physicists, for the most part, I would say, have fought tooth and nail for the deterministic, materialistic sort of interpretation of it. But there hasn't been any science done. If you look at mysticism, there's a whole, or even Buddhism, I should say, there's a whole science that looks at the observer experiencing reality. Mm-hmm. How does one experience reality? How do you describe the experience? And more so, how are you aware of what is happening specifically in your experience? Becoming really in tune with the experience itself. There's a whole science behind this in Buddhist teachings. But there isn't anything like that in Western science. I mean, we've got cognitive behavioral psychology, we've got studies that study neurology and microtubules and all that stuff. But we don't have a science that actually, I think it was Alan Wallace that really talks about this a lot. There isn't a science that talks about the experience of the observer.
Right. Well, the reason for that is our science, and we can go into some history of why it's like that, but our science defines reality in terms of what's objective.
Right.
Only objective things are real. Subjective things are not real. Mm-hmm. So if you're a scientist, you only work with the objective world. But of course, anyone who stops and thinks a minute will realize that the subjective world, the world of your understanding, the world of your experience, the world of your love and your caring and your connections and your relationships and all of that is the subjective world. And that is by far more significant to a person's life than the objective is. Well, the objective world is, sure, it's the trees and the rocks, and the houses and the physical bodies and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And science studies all that stuff, to meticulous detail. But when it comes to the experience of people, that's all subjective. Mm. And science will not go there. Matter of fact, when anybody does anything, even on the edges of science, that involves the subjective, science keeps an arm's distance from them, ridicules them, or they have to rely on statistics to show their connection to the objective world. Mm-hmm. And well, medicine is like that. With medicine, it's really hard to know objectively exactly what any medicine does. You give somebody medicine for a headache and their headache gets better, but it might have gotten better anyway. You see, there's no objective way to really tell that your medicine was what caused it, because there's this very complex biological thing there called your body that has so many variables in it that nobody really knows what happens once you swallow that pill. And the fact that your headache went away, well, maybe the medicine may not, but medicine covers that up with statistics. So you give 1,000 people with headaches a pill and see how many, and if 998 of them get better, well, now you've got some statistical evidence that shows you do the statistics and you're looking for the significance of the statistics. And above a certain significance level, then you say, we'll call that objective, even though it isn't really, but we're showing how it connects to the objective world. So that's our problem. And I think it goes back to the inception of science in the first place. Then there was this dichotomy between religion and science. The high priests of the older cultures were the people who told everybody else what to believe. Religion was the source of truth. And science and religion kind of started off squabbling with each other because they disagreed on things. Science was looking at the objective world, and they often would disagree with the religious viewpoint of how that objective world worked. Mm-hmm. Well, within that struggle, eventually they decided to each one decided to let the other be. All right, the religion said, okay, science, you can go off and talk about the physical world, but don't talk about anything else. And science said, all right, religion, you can take care of the spiritual and the subjective world, but don't try to tell us, what's happening in the physical world. So they went their separate ways. And it's been like that ever since. And it's unfortunate because a holistic view of a human being has to take into consideration that subjective side. That's the big side. That's the side where all the meaning comes from actually in your life. Not the stuff. I mean, maybe some people get into their stuff and they feel good for a short while because they have a brand new car in the garage, but that never lasts very long. That's all very superficial and isn't really the stuff of what happiness is made of.
So would you say, Tom, sorry to interlude, Tom. Would you say that science then by its very nature cannot actually access the subjective world?
Well, science as it has defined itself in Western culture cannot access the subjective world. What I have done is tried to unite those two. I started with a theory of consciousness.
Yes.
And that theory of consciousness was based on my own experiences exploring non-physical reality, exploring the larger consciousness system. I had a lot of data points there from that exploration. So I developed this model of consciousness. I also knew that consciousness had to be fundamental. It wasn't the subset. Consciousness wasn't created in a human brain. It didn't work that way. Consciousness was the fundamental thing, and the physical world was a subset of that. But I didn't know exactly how to put that into scientific terms. Well, about 3 years after my books were published, I had this CHO, I called it, Theory of Everything. Mainly it was a theory of consciousness. And I called it everything because I knew everything else was going to be a subset of this theory of consciousness. I got the idea of how it did talk to physics. And I suddenly just realized that that same theory would explain why quantum mechanics worked the way it did. It would explain why should particles be described as probability distributions, which is the way it is in quantum mechanics. And just a little more thought, I realized it also explained relativity. Why should C be a constant? So now I had this consciousness theory actually deriving the unknowns of physics. because those two questions are both unknowns. Those are paradoxes. We don't know why the speed of light is a constant. Nothing else is. Everything else, the speeds are relative. But see, the speed of light, not so. Constant, always a constant. It's the upper speed limit for everything else. Nothing can go faster than that. And there's a simple explanation for that once you understand virtual reality and understand how the virtual reality mechanics creates this virtual reality that we're living in. So now I had an explanation of both quantum mechanics and relativity, which is defined actually as the scientific Tao. It's the thing that can define those two things. So now I wanted to take that down to a lower level to where I could talk about specific quantum mechanics experiments and then do some science myself that would produce facts, that is, experiments that would work a certain way that would show that this is a virtual reality. So that's kind of how I got there. It's all derived actually from an understanding of consciousness. So I'm trying to take the rules that define consciousness, the virtual reality concepts, and show how these derive physics. I've already done a derivation of the fundamentals of both of those sciences, quantum mechanics and relativity, but I'd like to also push it down into the everyday stuff, into the macro world and the micro world to see how that works. So that's really what's going on. Now, the scientists are not too happy about it, mostly.
Exactly.
They reject it
right.
because it's not materialism, it's not determinism, and their belief in that is as strong as any believer's belief is in anything. They are no less believers than those that ring our doorbells and tell us the end of the world is near.
Right.
They're very strong believers.
So that's my question: is are we beating a dead horse?
No, I don't think so. There are probably 20% of the young physicists, particularly in the better, more powerful institutions, that think virtual reality is a really good idea. Because they've looked at the experiments from 100 years ago, the double slit, to a lot of other things that have been done since, and this being a virtual reality, and they call it a reality that is based on information, but those two things are the same thing.
But are they physicists that belong to, let's say, the Elon Musk camp, or are they physicists that actually understand it from your perspective, from the MBT perspective?
I don't know that any of them understand it from the MBT perspective. They're mostly in the Elon Musk. But at least they have step one, and that is, this is a virtual reality. It's a computed reality. They get that. But because they're materialists, after they say that, now they need to make up something that justifies that as being physical. So they make up something that's a little wild. They say, well, this is us. We humans in the future are making this virtual reality because we're enamored with the past,
right?
And we are the conscious beings walking around in this virtual reality. Well, there's a couple of logical things there that just don't add up. I mean, that's just wrong.
Yeah.
You can show that is irrational, but it's the only answer they have to make it deterministic and
right.
And
but back
materialistic
back to my point, Tom, is that they'll dig their heels in. Even I have a feeling, even after you do these experiments and after you get the results that you want, you're going to dig their heels in even deeper, trying to give a materialistic, deterministic explanation of it.
They will,
right?
Yeah, they will, but I don't think they will persist. They will indeed, because that's their nature. They want everything to be material, and they will struggle for that.
Right.
But I think that, again, there is the logic to see it another way is just piling up and piling up and piling up. And I think that eventually the physicists, probably the younger ones, the ones that are coming in, the graduate students of today and the graduate students a decade from now, they're going to see it very differently, because virtual reality right now is a hard sell. I mean, people look around and they say, what, this is all a game and it's computed and my body is just an avatar? Nonsense. That doesn't make any sense at all, you see. But that's because virtual reality is kind of a strange thing to think about. But in another decade, that's not going to be the case. In another decade, the young scientists coming along will have had virtual reality goggles on, since they were 10 years old.
Right.
And those are going to get better and better and better to where once you put those goggles on, you don't know that you're not in that reality anymore. It's going to be just very, very real. And for them to think about this as a virtual reality will be, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Sure, this is a computed reality. It's based on information.
Yeah.
What else could it be? So I think that's changing. I don't think the heels can be dug in much longer.
Yeah.
I believe that the whole paradigm concerning virtual reality will go from, well, that's a ridiculous idea, to, yeah, that's an obvious idea. So I don't think it'll be a hard sell in a decade or 2 decades from now.
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think the experience of the younger generation. I look at my 9-year-old, my 7-year-old, who are constantly playing, games and virtual reality games, and give it another 10, 15, 20 years, and and put in is it Moore's law, and it's going to be a lot more realistic than it is obviously where it's at right now. So, and if that becomes their experience, and it becomes their personal subjective experience of what virtual reality is, then they'll buy into this concept a lot easier, would be my assumption.
Sure. It's just not going to seem that outrageous to them. Right now, to us, it seems outrageous. But to them, it won't, because they'll look at the science, and the science is pointing that direction. And suddenly the need to hang on to materialism, I think, will start to get weaker and weaker as people's own personal experiences shows them otherwise. That, this could be a virtual reality. I see how that works. So you have to keep piling on the evidence and keep piling it on and piling it on. And I guess I'm just going to try to pile on another pile of it on top of what's already there.
Yeah.
But I believe we're at a point that soon in cultural terms, I guess, that we're going to go around that bend, and virtual reality. Yeah, there's a tipping point. I think we're getting close to that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people now, a lot of physicists that think that virtual reality is a good idea. They just don't have a context in which to put it. So they're stuffing it into a materialistic context, but they know it doesn't really fit. They know that's not a good fit. It's not that they really believe that's the way it is. They don't know how it is, and they don't have anything better to hang it on it, and they have no better way to describe it. So I'm going to try to give them a better way, and they will probably refuse that for a while, but I don't think they're going to refuse it for a long time anymore. I think we're at the end of this material. Outgrow it. We're finally going to see that is not what's important in the world.
Yeah.
So
what's the so there's a documentary as well. You spoke about the documentary idea as part of the Kickstarter. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, we are going to try to film all of it from the very beginning. All the things we do, even probably the process of trying to find lab space and scientists, trying to make all of it as transparent as possible. And one of the ideas we have is when we actually get to start doing the experiments, we have lab space, see if we can put some cams on the wall someplace so that it's 24/7. Anything going on in that lab, anybody with a computer and a browser can watch it.
Yeah.
So that will make it very transparent that, what's going on and who's doing it and how does it work. And whether all that gets recorded or not, I don't know. That'd be a huge amount of data to keep up with, but it'll be available in any case. And we have various film crews, and from my way of thinking, more than one. We should have 5 or 6 or 7 different groups of people coming through making their own documentaries, however they'd like to do that. Plus, we will take some of this money and document it ourselves and make our own documentary. So we'd like it to be completely transparent and not a mysterious process. We'd like everybody to know what we were thinking and when we were thinking it and how did it work out. So that's the point. Since doing experiments is about gaining information, whether they work the way you think or don't work the way you think, you still gain information. So
yes.
there's no loss in doing the experiment. So let's put it all on video and let everybody see the results, let everybody see how it works out. So yeah, I'd be surprised if they all work out the way I think. That would be almost too much to ask for. I suspect some of them won't, but that's okay. The ones that don't, I'll learn something from.
Have you tried to sort of run these experiments through your consciousness in a sense to see what sort of the gaps may be at all? I mean, have you approached it in that way versus running it from the physical? I
have not. There's a couple of reasons. You have to be very careful about what you get from non-physical information. I've learned that, I guess, the hard way, and probably also a lot the not hard way. But that is, when you get information about the physical from the non-physical, you still have to understand it from a first principles viewpoint. You still have to understand it as you have to make it yours. Otherwise, it's somebody else's idea. If it's somebody else's idea, you can't explain it. You can't really talk about it very well. It's not personal. It's not yours. So the things need to be ours, right or wrong, and then we'll learn from it. But getting the information from elsewhere and saying, well, I talked to this voice and it told me, it would be this way. Well, that's not the way science generally works. If you say that to a scientist, they will probably, walk away from you, won't talk to you anymore. They will put a hex sign on you and, put you in a
I meant from a preparatory sort of angle. Is there something that maybe you if you run it through your non-physical space, maybe there's an angle that comes up in a sense that maybe I should approach it this way or that way?
No, I haven't done that. Now I do get nudges now and again. I figure any information that the larger conscious system wants to give to me, I'm open.
Yes.
But I don't go looking for it.
Yeah.
Because as soon as I go looking for it, because I want to know, now I put it at risk that I'm going to get something that is bogus. Because the fact that I'm looking for it is means I have some sort of expectation. I want some particular kind of, understanding that I'm getting, and I'd rather them just tell me without me having to ask if there's something that I need to know. So I tend to work that way all the time. When you are connected to the larger consciousness system to some extent, you find out that you can do all sorts of things. You can get lots of information. You can get information about other people. You can get information about future probabilities and past occurrences, and there's a lot of information out there. But you have to be very careful not to let any of that run your life. You still have to make all your choices the best you can from what you understand and what you know, and you make your choices there, because there's a problem with making choices based on somebody else's information. It's not so much really your choice anymore. You're a follower. You're just doing what you're told, or what you're getting, and that is really getting in your own game. That is cutting you off from the experiences that you need to grow yourself. So I've found that the people who, in general, have the most quote unquote power, to heal, to remote view, to get information about people or things, they use it the least. They don't really use it, because pretty soon, if you go down that path, you're putting yourself in a bubble. You put yourself in a bubble of a reality that you're creating out of all of this information, and you're no longer you making your own choices, because that's where you are. That's the extent of your knowledge, of your caring, of your love, or whatever it is.
Right.
And you need to make your choices based on just who you are, not on special information you have access to, because that's where your growth comes from. You can't really grow up. So you kind of get in your own game that way if you try to game the system by getting information from elsewhere. So I have learned a long time ago I get that information as it comes to me, and I think about it. And if I like it and think it's good, I use it. And if I don't like it and not sure it's good, I let it alone. Maybe I'll use it later, maybe I won't, you see. But it's my choice based on just what I know, the extent that I have evolved the quality of my consciousness to this point. I have to make the choice. And when I make the choice, I have to deal with the consequences. If it's a bad choice, well, I get a lesson. And I'll look at the results of that bad choice and I'll learn something. If it's a good choice, I'll get another lesson, a happier lesson, but a lesson just the same, that was a good choice. And I'll do more of those. Where if I did it because somebody told me, you see, there's not much lesson in there. There's not much personal growth involved in it. So if you're going to grow yourself up, which is what we're all here for, then you need to do it under your own power. So no, I don't get a lot of answers, out of the non-physical, unless the non-physical wants to tell me something. And sometimes they do. Sometimes they'll give me a nudge or something, and I typically pay attention to those, but I don't make my choices based on them. Sometimes they'll help me have a bigger perspective, say, and that's good, but I don't make my choices based on those. So I want to succeed or fail on my own merits for what I know, for the quality that I bring, and learn from that. So that's why I don't do those things. So, I used to when I was practicing.
I was going to say in the beginning, you tend to be a little bit more playing in that realm and trying to sort of.
Yes, in the beginning when I first was trying to understand my mind and how it worked and the larger system, I did a lot of that sort of thing. I was into remote viewing and healing and telepathy, and I'd work on those things and I practiced with them. And just the process of practicing and doing those things helps you grow up because it helps you see a bigger picture. And as you see bigger pictures, you understand the world in a more profound way, and it helps move you toward being kind, more considerate, more compassionate people, because you see those people within a bigger picture, not just your narrow picture of, well, what can they do for me? That's a very narrow, self-centered picture. As your world gets bigger, you see it differently. So those things do help you grow up. But as you grow up and you get better and better at it, you tend to let it go. It's there, it's available, but you don't really play with it anymore because you're kind of past that point. It's almost like meditation. In the beginning, when I first learned to meditate, I meditated 2 or 3 times every day, very religiously. Every day I do my meditation because I needed that sort of consistency. Otherwise, I wouldn't get very far. But now I don't meditate at all in a formal way. My life is a meditation. Just my existence is part of my meditation. And I don't just live in this physical reality. I live in multiple realities all the time. So as I meet people or say things or do things happen, I'm getting data and information from a whole bunch of things, but I don't let it affect what I'm doing. I just take it in, and it's part of me, and it's part of part of the way I understand things, but all my choices have to be mine. I don't make choices because I get something that somebody tells me this would be a good thing to do, unless that's my own choice to do it. So I guess it falls under responsibility for your choices. You have to take full responsibility for your choices. So even if, you hear the voice of God, talking in your ear, and he tells you to go, jump off a cliff, you ought to think about that and decide whether that's something that you really should do. And is that a high entropy or low entropy choice? And that sort of thing, and make your own choice. Because the system I have found, if you stop making your own choices, if you start giving up your free will to something else, the system will give you some poor information, will give you some sometimes false information or misleading information, just so you fall on your face and get the lesson, make your own choices. Don't do everything I tell you. You need to think about what you're doing. So, and that's happened. I've seen that happen a half a dozen times with remote viewers. They start to get famous. They start to get really puffed up about themselves. They're really good at it, 80, 90% right all the time. And pretty soon they're seeing, little green men with pointy ears running around on the backside of the moon or something like that. And after that, they kind of fall flat on their face. It's
I mean, it comes with that spiritual maturity, like you're talking about, in the sense of, you're growing up and you come to this realization that I'm here for a reason. I need to be in this sort of virtual reality and play this out and be present here. And,
exactly.
I've figured out what's going on in the background, or what's happening sort of, under the hood, so to speak. But let's focus on driving the car, because I'm here to drive the car.
Exactly. That's it. And if you're driving the car, if you're trying to drive the car by what you're getting out of the background and everything else, you're going to do a poor job at driving that car. Yeah. So that's why we're here. Focus on it. And all that other stuff is nice. It's helpful. It helps you see bigger pictures. Now, when you see someone, you can get a sense of how they're feeling, why they feel that way, the depth of their emotion. What do they need? Do they need a hug, or do they just need to be left alone? You can get a lot of information that helps you be part of their solution rather than a part of their problem. So that's good. But it doesn't tell you what to do. It just tells you the way the world is. Yes. You still have to make your decision and your own choice about what to do about it. So, yes,
and there's this greater appreciation that they have to drive their own cars. In a sense, exactly. I can't drive the car for them. If I see them on the side of the road, well, I'll offer to help and I'll offer to give them a hand. And that's where the compassion comes from. But ultimately, you got to get in the driver's seat. You got to drive your car, and I can just give you some advice at the end of the day. So you look at healing from a very different perspective, and you see how, I can't fix this person. I can't ultimately change anybody. All I can do is just be love, be compassionate.
Yeah, absolutely. I've learned that. See, I've been doing this since the early 70s, I guess. So I've got a lot of years in this. And I've had experiences when I was much younger where I was healing someone. They had cancer of their stomach, and I would heal that. So the cancer of the stomach goes away. And then within 3 months, they get a rare blood disease, something only 1 in 100,000 people get. And then while they had that rare blood disease, they were on some sort of painkiller, and the doctor gives them an overdose of narcotic and kills them. So now I find out, you see later, that the reason they had that cancer was because they had hit a young person who was riding a bicycle with their car when they had been drinking. They felt terribly guilty about that, and that guilt had finally, 20 years later, created the cancer. And that was the problem. They, in a deeper space, didn't feel worthy of living. Yeah. And they felt they were living a lie, and they had all of that going on. So when you took that away, they picked up something that was, some rare thing that they just picked up. And when that looked like that maybe was turning around, they got an overdose, which was a careless mistake, just like the careless mistake they made when they ran over that young person. So you get to see the whole picture, and you realize, that was really something you should let alone. You shouldn't heal that cancer because there was an issue there. Now, what you could have done is tried to talk with that person, and probably telepathically, because you don't want strangers butting into your life and telling you, what things you need to think about, is not really usually accepted very well. But you could telepathically talk with that person and kind of counsel them. Tell them that, they do have value, and they are adding to the society, and they do help people here. And that was a terrible thing that they did, but they need to accept that and let it go and get over it. Okay. They know what they did that was wrong, and they haven't repeated it. They've grown. Now move forward. That's what life is about. Guilt is dysfunctional. Go on with your life. And you could have done that sort of thing, but just taking away the cancer wasn't that guy's solution. It just pushed him into another process. Yeah. So it would have been, so I've learned, things like that over 45 years of doing this, you learn that. And now I look at people, and when I see the illness, the next thing I see is why they have it. What's where's that come from? Is that just a random thing? They just happen to pick up because of accident, it's a random event. Or is that something that's on their path that they need to struggle with? Because illness can teach you a lot, and it can teach the people around you a lot. it tends to, if you're very ill, it tends to make you see separate the wheat from the chaff much more easily than before. If you're deathly ill, then suddenly all the stuff that used to be important to you isn't important to you anymore. The stuff that really is important becomes important to you again. Those kinds of lessons are important. And if that disease kills you, well, that's just a chapter in a long book. But you learned an important lesson.
Yeah.
So the fact that you learned an important lesson from that illness, and you get now that learning, when you come back the next time, you take that learning with you, well, that's a good plus up. And all you had to do was really deal with that illness in the right way, rather than feel guilty or get angry or any of that stuff. You had to accept it and deal with it, and then you pass on and have a benefit. Whereas if you didn't have that illness, you may just grind on and not learn anything, and then get run over by a truck and still never learn anything. And now you start your next life and you're right back where you were the last time. So even death can be, a good solution as far as your learning goes. It depends. So you don't want to take people's illnesses away if they need that illness and it's on their path for growing up, even if that path means that it's going to kill them. That's not necessarily a bad thing in the bigger picture of their growing up. So, you look at life differently after a while. In the beginning, I was healing everybody I knew that, had some kind of ailment, and I really wasn't thinking a whole lot about the consequences of that, to them, because I was just trying to figure out, how does it work? Why does it work? So I just needed a lot of practice. But you mature through this process and you start seeing things from bigger pictures. So you don't use that information, except but rarely, and only then because it's necessary to help somebody.
Yeah. Your ego falls away and you realize what it is in its true nature. I mean, Eastern wisdom teaches this so well, in the sense of death and pain and suffering is the awakening process in of itself. Rumi's got that beautiful poem where the pain is where the light enters you. And I mean, they understand this from a fundamental level, that, your pain and suffering are there because there is this illusion in the way you look at reality, and your viewpoint of reality is actually skewed, and therefore that is trickling down to the physical, and your physical frequency is an expression of that.
Absolutely. That is the way it is. Most all of our struggle, all of our pain, all of our unhappiness is self-created. Mm-hmm. If we could have a different attitude, a different perspective, all that would just disappear. Yeah. It's not real. But we make our own reality in many ways, and one way is how we interpret the data. So, an illness is just something that we interpret. And if we interpret it as, oh, it's a terrible thing, why does it happen to me? And that sort of way, if that's how we interpret it, then we de-evolve rather than evolve. That's not toward love. That's not toward caring. That's toward, it's all about me. So, yes, we interpret our reality, and we tend to interpret it as something awful, something terrible, something hard, something painful, when in fact we could look at it from a different perspective and all of that would disappear. So it's not that you actually go out and move all the pieces on the board. It's just you change yourself so that your perspective is such that you see that board and all the players on it from a bigger picture. And you realize that it's just about the way it ought to be. It's everything is pretty much the way it needs to be. The people who are suffering, well, that suffering is it's like you have sticks and carrots, to get your donkey to move. And, the suffering we do is basically the sticks. And, the good things that happen to us are basically the carrots. And it works both ways. Well, if you start to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, what you're here for, then there's a whole lot more carrots than there are sticks. Suddenly there's all of these wonderful things that are just ahead of you. You just need to straighten out and see it from a better perspective. Whereas when you have no idea and you're clueless, kind of wandering around on this playing field in this virtual reality with no idea what the game is, there seems to be sticks everywhere. Every time you try to manipulate something, you try to force things to come out the way you want, well, you end up getting hit with a stick, because those things are just dysfunctional. And it's not like there's really somebody there watching you hit you with a stick. You're hitting yourself with a stick because your behaviors and your attitude and the way you're interpreting the data you get is just dysfunctional. And part of that dysfunction is the pain that you create and the struggle that you create. Yeah, that's, it's so simple when you have the bigger picture. Life is no longer complicated. It is so simple. But when you're lost in it, struggling, it's so complicated and so obtuse and so impossible to ever get ahead. So
and that's the paradox. I mean, that truly is the paradox, isn't it? That you have to almost reach this rock bottom to finally go, aha, I get it, and to get in the way of that sometimes just prolongs that process. There is this, so it's like this balance in Mahayana Buddhism. The Bodhisattva is the lifeguard. You come back into this life to be a lifeguard, essentially, and you just kind of overlook and see who's drowning out there and just pull them back out and tell them, no, this is how you swim. You don't go that far out, whatever it is. So this ideology of just be the lifeguard, look around and walk the path, but don't get in the way of how they're doing what they're doing, because they need to experience what drowning kind of feels like to understand, oh, okay, this is how I swim. So, walking that path, I guess, for our sake is all we can do. And then just being there for those who do need it. Yes.
And being there to help them when they need help, and being there to hug them when they need a hug, and, that sort of thing. You can't really help anybody else grow up other than give them an environment in which they can grow themselves up. Yeah. And that environment that helps them do that is an environment where you make them feel safe, where you make them feel cared for, where you make them feel loved. If they feel that unconditional love from you, then no matter what they do, you're still going to take care of them. You're still going to love them, whatever. Now you give them the courage to kind of reach out past that comfort zone a little bit and maybe make a change. Yeah. But as long as they have the mindset of a cornered creature, and every way they see is not a good way. Every avenue is a bad choice. Then they're not going to grow up much because they're stuck. They're not going to see that bigger picture when they're so trapped in the little picture.
And it's part of our work as well, because part of that is sometimes they're attacking us for not being who, we need to be, in essence. So part of our work is to detach from that and see it for what it is as well, which is sort of us growing, continuing to grow in that environment. And it works both ways. You're always working on yourself. I guess Ram Dass that says it best. You're working on others to work on yourself. And
absolutely,
it all comes around.
Yeah, well, you have to work on others to work on yourself. Yeah. Because if you just work on yourself, that is a very suboptimal game. In other words, you could be an aesthetic, find yourself a nice little cave, go out and live in it, right? Be a hermit and never interact with other people. And from my viewpoint, that's a very limiting environment, a very limiting process. Yes, you could intellectually and maybe even other ways grow, but the way most of us grow up is by our interactions with other people. That's where our challenges come from. When we have to deal with those people who frustrate us, who push our buttons, who makes our egos jump up and down and scream, who get us angry. That is where you learn. Those are the people who are your teachers. And you escape all that if you're in the benign environment of a hermit. Then your only challenge is to find enough food and shelter to stay alive. That's kind of your only challenge. And that's not nearly the personal challenge that you get when you're trying to live with somebody. Yeah. When you have a spouse, a significant other, and you have a bunch of teenagers, and you have life and a job and a boss that doesn't understand and all this other stuff.
You're in a pressure cooker.
That's the stuff that helps you grow up.
Yes.
That helps you learn, as long as you know what you're here for and what the game is. And if you know that, then you can look at all these things as challenges. Yeah. And instead of feeling beset by problems, you can see as giving an opportunity of a lot of challenges. And it makes the whole thing go from a sad, kind of terrible place to a happy, kind of interesting place, just from changing that perspective. So yes, you get sick, or somebody close to you dies, or your dog gets run over, or whatever it is in your life. You lose your job, whatever that is. You see, well, that's an opportunity. I can, how I deal with this is what's important. The thing itself is not all that important. How I deal with it is what's really, really important. And I'm going to try to deal with it in a way that, I evolve the quality of my consciousness, not de-evolve it. And now it's a puzzle to solve. How do I do that? And that makes it fun, actually, even if it's a kind of a tough thing to get through.
Yeah, there's a sense of awareness that has to take place first, because to tell someone just, look on the bright side and just look at it as a challenge, so what, this person did this to you. No, you got your job, you lost your job, but look at it as a challenge. They'll look at you, they'll want to swing a bat at you in a sense, but it's the awakening has to happen first for you to say to yourself, wow, this is a place where I learn. And everything that happens to me, as much as it irritates me, is going to awaken me a little bit more. And it has to irritate, it has to hit the bone, has to feel, you got to feel that pain sometimes. Even when you think, oh, you got it all figured out, then something comes around and just hits you in the bone. You're like, oh, okay, there's another one. I need to learn from this one a little bit more, a little more deeper. And to maintain that perspective, that's the work. Yeah.
Yes. And as you say, you cannot tell people things they are not ready to understand.
No.
Matter of fact, if you try to do that, you'll make things worse for them rather than better for them. So you always have to be very careful about what you say to people.
Yeah.
You can't just go around, tell everybody everything you know or share everything you've experienced. That's just not a good way to do it. You have to tell people things in measured amounts that they can deal with the information. Because if you tell them things that are outside of their own experience, they don't have any way to process that. So if you say, oh, just be happy, that's all you have to do, just be happy. Well, that's not helpful to somebody who doesn't really understand the idea of being positive. It creates more positiveness. You can tell them that, it just makes them angry. It makes them, like they say, want to slap you or something. It is not helpful at all. So you have to be careful about what you say. And because giving people things they're not ready for makes it harder for them to grow up, not easier.
In that spirit, Tom, well, I hope these experiments will be replicated, and so that other physicists may make them their own experience. And in that spirit, question consciousness, because I think it has to be questioned first, and not just looking at it from a experimental sort of perspective. They need to do the experience themselves. They need to see the results themselves, and they need to question, well, how the hell did that happen? And
absolutely,
and hopefully that breaks it open.
I tell all my people that I'm one of the strangest speakers. When I speak, at the end of my speech, almost every time I talk to people, I say, listen, people, don't believe a word that I've told you.
Yeah.
Don't believe any of it, because believing it or not believing it are both useless. You have to experience it. If it's not your experience, it's not your truth. And if it's not your truth, it's not going to help you grow up any.
Yeah.
So you have to experience it. So then, because I tell people that, and of course they want to know how can I experience it? Then I give usually at the last day, or I've got a set of courses I give now that show people how, give them a way of experiencing these things themselves, so that they get a sense of the larger conscious system. Mm-hmm. They get a sense that they need to forge a working relationship with that larger consciousness system. They need to practice their intent, separating their intellect from their being level, getting rid of their fear, realizing when the ego is talking. Yeah. All these kinds of things are stuff they need to work on. So I have little training courses for them, because if it's not your experience, then it's not your truth. And if it's not your truth, it's interesting maybe, but it isn't going to help you grow up any. You have to have the experience. You can't just get the talk. You've got to do the walk. And that's the way growth happens, through your own experience. No shortcut. You can take a drug that'll zing you up into inner space, but it won't
shoot you back down.
Yeah, and then you crash back down. But the thing is, all it does is leave you with an experience.
Yeah.
Okay, you've had this fantastic experience, but having an experience doesn't help you grow up any.
Yeah.
What helps you grow up is, what do you do with that experience? And if you didn't get there on your own, you don't know what to do with that experience. There you are, you're this guy, you take a drug, and wham, you get this experience, and then you crash, then you throw up, then you think about the experience, and you don't know how to sort it. You don't know how to interpret it. You don't know what to do with it. So you go have another one, and you end up with lots of really amazing experiences, no doubt, and they're real experiences. You really are getting information out of the larger system, but without the context of what it means and what you should do with it and how you need to grow to it, most people don't grow from it at all. They grow in their intellectual understanding, but not at the being level. So they feel that they are more spiritual and have a deeper sense of things, but it's all up here, because that's where the experience is. The experience never got anywhere but up here, because it's just an experience. It didn't come down here where it actually is a part of them and it means something and they understand it. It was always up in their head. So they get this idea that now they're a much more spiritual person because of their experiences, but they haven't really grown up much. That's the sad part. So yeah, drugs is a path, but it's not a very effective path.
Well, it's like I say, it's like jumping on a trampoline to look over the wall. You want to see what's over on the other side, so you keep jumping on the trampoline. But at some point, it's going to have there's a price you do pay for it, and especially for those who do get addicted to the experience, they want to keep experiencing that because they keep falling back to this reality, and this reality just doesn't, bode well for them, and so you pay the price physically, mentally.
I've also found that. One of the prices you pay is that after doing it the easy way, which means just gaining an experience by popping a pill, the hard way becomes more and more out of reach. You no longer have the drive and the gumption and the stick-to-itiveness that you need to actually do it the way it needs to be done.
Yeah.
If it just seems to be too hard because you've done it the easy way long enough that you kind of eliminate the gumption that's required to do it the hard way. And now you've done yourself a disservice, because now you're in a deeper hole than you were before you ever started. And that is a problem with people. And also in their minds, they convince themselves that they are a lot more spiritual when they really aren't. That's another thing. If you already think you're done, then you don't have a lot of incentive to go work on it. So I've found that for those who take it maybe once or twice, see a bigger picture and leave it alone and go try to work on that bigger picture on their own, well, then that drug was a service. Yeah. But for everybody who takes it and then takes it again and then takes it again, and then after that they take it again, it seems to leave them in a deeper hole than what they started from. It's not a good way to go. Experience isn't the key. The key is dealing with that experience, and we get 100 chances every day to deal with experiences. We don't need that. That's not where the growth comes from. The growth comes from just being here, being a part of it, and interacting with it, just like everybody else. And of course, once you realize that everybody's on their own path, doing the best they can with what they've got, mostly all they really need is a little compassion from you. And a little, a little help as you might be able to do it. But there's really not that much more than you can do for them. No. Other than give them that safe place where they can grow themselves.
Yeah. Absolutely, sir. This is wonderful. Thank you for this experience again.
You're welcome. It's been fun.
Yeah.
This is what I do. I talk to people about these sorts of things.
We should do this more often. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. I appreciate you taking the time, coming out of a sabbatical to talk with me.
It's great to be back. It's been too long.